The conference room smelled like disinfectant and bad news. My older brother, Marcus, a respected neurologist at the city's most prestigious hospital, sat across from me with a gravity that felt rehearsed. My parents, Henry and Beatrice, flanked him like silent sentinels. Behind them, the MRI scan of a human brain glowed on a large screen, casting a clinical blue light over the expensive wood furniture. Early onset degenerative disease, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a professional register he usually reserved for his wealthiest patients. It is progressive and incredibly aggressive, Kimberly. My mother began crying immediately, her expensive silk handkerchief already pressed to her eyes. My father reached out to pat her hand, his face a mask of weary tragedy. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, Kimberly Reed, a 32-year-old woman watching her family perform a play I had already seen the script for. They didn't know that 2 days ago, I had visited an independent clinic across the state line. I knew exactly what a healthy brain looked like, and I knew that the glowing image on the screen behind my brother wasn't mine. It was a forgery designed to bury me alive while I was still breathing. They gave me 12 months to live. Maybe less if the degeneration accelerated as Marcus predicted. Before we even left the hospital, the suggestions started rolling in like a pre-planned landslide. They suggested I move back into the family estate so they could monitor my health. They talked about simplifying my complex finances to reduce stress. Marcus mentioned with a fake sympathetic tilt of his head that he could help manage my affairs so I could focus on my final days. It sounded like the ultimate act of family compassion, until the paperwork appeared on the kitchen table the next morning. There were guardianship discussions and power of attorney drafts already typed up with my name on them. "It's just in case things get foggy for you, honey," my father said gently, pushing a fountain pen toward me. I looked at the legal jargon that would effectively strip me of my personhood and hand my life over to Marcus. I signed nothing. I didn't argue or scream either. I simply smiled a weak, sick smile and told them I needed a few days to process the news. I watched Marcus's eyes flicker with a momentary flash of annoyance before he smoothed his expression back into a mask of brotherly concern. The truth was tucked safely in a locked drawer at my office. 2 days before this family intervention, I had driven 3 hours to an independent imaging center where no one knew the Reed name. I used a different radiologist and a different lab. The results were boringly perfect. There was no degeneration, no abnormality, and certainly no impending death. When I held that second report in my hand, something colder and sharper than fear settled in my chest. This wasn't a medical mistake. It was a conspiracy. My own flesh and blood weren't trying to save me, they were trying to control me. They wanted me legally incompetent and physically isolated. I realized that my brother wasn't just a doctor, he was a predator using his white coat as camouflage. I sat in my car in the rain, clutching the real results, and realized that my life as I knew it was over. I couldn't just tell them I knew. They were powerful, influential, and deeply embedded in the medical board. If I fought them openly now, they would just find a more surgical way to cut me out. I had to play the part they wrote for me until I could flip the script. The escalation began almost immediately. Packs of medication arrived at the house, heavy sedatives, and experimental neurological drugs. I never took a single pill. I spent my mornings palming the capsules and flushing them down the guest bathroom toilet. Surgery consultations were scheduled without my consent, which I managed to forget by taking long, aimless drives. My family began speaking to me slowly and patiently, the way people speak to a child or a person who is fading away. They spoke over me at dinner, as if I wasn't in the room. My finances became their favorite dinner topic. "You shouldn't be stressed by the trust anymore, Kimberly," Marcus said, carving a piece of steak with clinical precision. "Let us handle everything. You need rest." I smiled at him, my eyes wide and vacant, playing the role of the deteriorating sister perfectly. Under the table, my thumb pressed the record button on the digital device taped to the bottom of the chair. Every condescending word, every veiled threat about my mental decline, and every discussion about my money was being captured in high-definition audio. I was a ghost in my own home, but this ghost was keeping a very detailed haunting log. While reviewing my private accounts late at night, I found the why behind their sudden cruelty. It was buried in our grandfather's estate trust, a document I hadn't looked at in years. There was a specific clause: control of a massive hospital investment fund, one worth tens of millions, would transfer fully and solely to me at age 32. I had turned 32 exactly 3 weeks before Marcus discovered my illness. The hospital where Marcus practiced and where my father sat on the board depended heavily on that fund for its upcoming expansion. If I were healthy and independent, I could move that money anywhere. But if I were declared incapacitated, the secondary trustee would take over. That trustee was Marcus. They weren't just trying to steal my autonomy, they were trying to secure the funding for their own professional legacies. I didn't confront them. I didn't even let my breathing change as I read the words on the screen. Instead, I called a medical malpractice attorney who specialized in high-stakes institutional fraud. I told him everything, and I could hear the silent shock on the other end of the line. "Kimberly," he whispered, "this isn't just a lawsuit. This is a crime." We began building a cage made of evidence, one bar at a time. At family dinners, I wore the professional mask of a victim. I asked timid questions about progression rates and brain atrophy. I thanked Marcus profusely for researching the best specialists and for taking time out of his busy surgical schedule to look after me. I lowered my voice to a shaky whisper and pretended to lose my train of thought mid-sentence. I acted tired, retreating to my room early every evening. It worked perfectly. Marcus began to relax. His arrogance, always his greatest weakness, took over. My parents stopped being so careful with their whispers in the hallway. They began discussing their plans for the trust money right in front of me, while I napped on the sofa. I heard them talk about the new neurological wing that would bear the Reed name, funded by the money they were stealing from my living hands. They spoke about me in the past tense, as if I were already a memory or a hurdle they had successfully cleared. I stayed still, my eyes closed, absorbing every confession of their greed. They thought they were watching me die, but I was actually watching them reveal the darkest parts of their souls. The more they believed in my weakness, the more evidence they handed me on a silver platter. The first major twist came when Marcus tried to force my hand. He claimed he had fast-tracked a high-risk surgery to decompress the imaginary lesions in my brain. "It's advancing faster than expected, Kim," he insisted, his face tight with fake urgency. "If we don't operate by next week, you might lose your speech entirely." It was a bold move. He wanted me under anesthesia, where he could do real damage to make his fake diagnosis a reality. It was a terrifying thought, but I knew I had the upper hand. My independent neurologist had confirmed just days prior that I had absolutely nothing to operate on. When I softly declined the surgery, citing fear of the risks, my parents exchanged a sharp, knowing look. That was the moment I knew for certain that this wasn't just Marcus acting alone. This was a coordinated effort by the entire family unit. They weren't panicking about my health. They were panicking because their window of opportunity was closing. They needed me incapacitated before the next trust audit. I realized then that I couldn't stay in that house much longer. The care they were offering was becoming a literal death trap, and I needed to finish my preparations before the next emergency arose. The pressure peaked when they suggested an emergency evaluation. Marcus brought home a colleague, a psychiatrist who was also on the hospital's payroll. They told me it was just to assess cognitive clarity and ensure I was making sound decisions regarding my treatment. I knew the real translation. They were trying to establish legal incompetence so they could bypass my consent entirely. The psychiatrist asked me simple questions, watching my eyes for signs of the disease Marcus had described. I played the part, giving slightly delayed answers, but I made sure everything I said was recorded by the device in my pocket. My attorney nearly dropped his pen when I played the recording for him later that afternoon. He immediately connected me with a state medical ethics investigator. Suddenly, this wasn't just a family drama or a private dispute over an inheritance. It was a massive institutional risk involving medical fraud, insurance tampering, and professional misconduct. "Don't change a thing," the investigator told me. "Let them think they're winning. We need them to commit fully to the lie. I went back to the house and said nothing. I sat in my room, staring at the walls, acting the part of the broken daughter, while the state began its silent approach. In a desperate move to squeeze me, I was suddenly restricted from initiating any large transfers from my trust account. My brother had sent a medical red flag to the Trust Oversight Board, claiming my cognitive decline made me a target for financial elder abuse, even though I was only 32. The funds weren't fully frozen yet, but they were flagged, meaning every move I made was scrutinized by the very board my father influenced. Marcus insisted it was a precautionary measure to protect my future. I let him think I believed his lies. I even cried a little, pretending to be frustrated by my failing memory. Behind the scenes, however, my attorney was filing formal inquiries and submitting the real medical reports to the Trust's legal counsel. We were bypassing the local board entirely and going straight to the state regulators. I was essentially leading my brother into a narrow hallway where there was only one exit, and that exit led directly to a courtroom. Every time he protected me, he was actually adding another charge to the indictment that was being drafted. He was so busy celebrating his control over my bank account that he didn't notice the legal net closing around his entire career. The climax arrived on a night Marcus had been anticipating for years. He was being honored at the hospital's annual fundraising gala for innovative neurological leadership. It was the social event of the year, filled with wealthy donors, hospital board members, and local media. It was the perfect place for him to solidify his power. He insisted I attend, even offering to buy me a new dress and have a stylist come to the house. "I want you there in the front row, Kim," he said, squeezing my shoulder with a terrifyingly firm grip. "I want everyone to see how we're fighting this together." Of course he did. He wanted me there as a prop, the tragic, fading sister who proved what a saintly and brilliant doctor he was. He wanted the donors to see my decline, so they would feel even more inspired to give money to his research fund. I agreed to go. I chose a dress that made me look pale and fragile, and I practiced my sick walk in the mirror. But while Marcus was practicing his victory speech, I was finalizing the delivery of a very different package to every single board member's private courier that afternoon. The gala ballroom glittered with crystal lights and expensive champagne. The air was thick with the smell of perfume and the sound of polite applause. It was a sea of black ties and silk gowns, all centered around my brother's ego. I sat in the front row as promised, my parents flanking me like guards. Marcus took the stage to a standing ovation. He gave a moving speech about ethical responsibility and the heavy burden of protecting vulnerable patients. He even pointed to me, his voice cracking with fake emotion as he spoke about the personal tragedy that fueled his passion for neurology. My mother dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and I saw several donors follow suit. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of dazed illness. I knew that the hospital's board of directors had received my documentation package only hours ago. They had the second opinions, the timeline discrepancies, the recorded conversations, and the grandfather's trust clause. They had the proof that their star doctor was a fraud and a criminal. They just hadn't opened the files yet, or so I thought. I watched the side of the stage, waiting for the one person I knew would have to act. Midway through Marcus's speech, right as he was describing the future of the Reed Neurological Wing, the hospital's chief compliance officer stepped onto the stage. She didn't look like she was there to present an award. She whispered something to the master of ceremonies, and a low murmur began to spread through the crowd. Marcus faltered, his practiced smile twitching at the corners. They requested a private meeting immediately, attempting to lead him off stage quietly. But the donors were watching, and more importantly, the journalists I had personally invited were already filming. The room went quiet, a heavy, expectant silence. This was the moment. I stood up from my chair, my movements no longer slow or shaky. I stood tall and looked my brother directly in the eye. "Is there a problem, Marcus?" I asked, my voice ringing out clearly through the microphone near the podium. "Do they have questions about my MRI scans, or would they prefer I just forward the audio recordings of our dinner conversations directly to the press right now?" The silence that followed was so absolute, you could hear a piece of cutlery settle on a china plate across the room. My brother's face didn't just turn pale, it turned a ghastly, translucent gray. The compliance officer didn't wait for him to answer. She signaled the tech booth, and suddenly the massive screens behind the stage changed. They projected 2 brain scans side by side. One was the forgery Marcus had used to diagnose me, labeled with my name and the hospital's logo. The other was the scan from the independent lab, showing a perfectly healthy brain. Gasps rippled through the ballroom like a physical wave. Then came the audio. My brother's voice, clear and cold, filled the room. If she's declared incompetent, control of the trust transfers to me immediately. The board won't ask questions if the diagnosis comes from me. The recording played on, capturing my parents' voices agreeing to the necessary deception. Marcus looked like a man watching his own execution. My parents looked like total strangers, their masks of grief replaced by pure, naked terror. The chess match was over. I hadn't just moved a piece, I had flipped the entire board over in front of everyone who mattered to them. The reputation they had spent decades building evaporated in less than 60 seconds. I didn't say another word. I just watched as the security guards, who were usually there to protect Marcus, moved to escort him toward the back rooms where the police were already waiting. The collapse was swift and structural. Within 48 hours, the world as the Reed family knew it ceased to exist. Marcus's surgical privileges were suspended indefinitely, pending a full criminal investigation. The state medical board opened a formal ethics review that would almost certainly lead to the permanent revocation of his license. The Trust Oversight Committee, now under the direction of the state regulators, froze every bit of discretionary authority my father had ever touched. This wasn't a scene of dramatic screaming or theatrical fights. It was something much colder and more final. Professional distancing. Donors who had been crying for Marcus only days ago quietly pulled their pledges and sent, effective immediately, emails to the hospital board. The Reed name, once a symbol of medical excellence, became a toxic brand that everyone was scrambling to avoid. My parents were facing conspiracy and fraud charges, their social standing destroyed overnight. I watched the news reports from a quiet hotel room, far away from the house that had become a prison. I felt no joy in their destruction, only a profound sense of relief. The truth had been expensive, but the cost of the lie would have been my entire life. 3 nights after the gala, my mother called me. She was crying, but this time the tears were real, tears of panic and desperation. My brother got on the line halfway through, his voice sounding hollow and old. "You've destroyed everything, Kimberly," he hissed, the arrogance finally gone, replaced by a bitter, poisonous rage. "The family name, our careers, the hospital wing, all of it is gone because you couldn't just play along." I sat by the window, looking out at the city lights, feeling the weight of the last few months finally lift. "No, Marcus," I replied calmly. "You tried to erase me. You tried to steal my future and my mind so you could build a monument to yourself. I didn't destroy anything. I just kept the receipts." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "You weren't even sick," he muttered, as if he was still trying to convince himself. "I know," I said, "and now, neither is my bank account." I hung up and blocked the number. The trust transferred sole oversight to me the following week. My first act was to schedule an external audit of the entire neurological department, not out of revenge, but out of responsibility. They thought I was dying, but the only thing that died was their access to my life. I never had to raise my voice once to win.